Worked.
Yes, and we are live. We're here. We got a live panel tonight. We got a live lead panel to be sure. We're going to be talking about Joker Folie à Deux, or Joker Shared Madness, as they say, aka Joker 2, Todd Phillips' sequel to the 2019 billion-dollar kind of experimental comic book art film that I don't know who was demanding a sequel except for the execs at Warner Brothers who said, you can't just leave $1 billion on the table, can you? Well, they spent $200 million to make a sequel, plus marketing, all that stuff, and it opened to 40 million, about half of the projections. So yeah, it's being derided as a flop, as a terrible movie, as a big mistake, as a who asked for this. And I was at the front of that protest, screaming about how I didn't want to see it and I hated the first movie, and so why would I want to watch a second? And then I saw Joker Folie à Deux, and I loved it. So we are going to talk tonight,
of course,
about this movie, and I know we're going to have a wide-ranging discussion, a spoilerific discussion, if I do say so myself, with a wide range of opinions. So I am Ian Simmons of Kicking the Seat. Welcome, everybody. David Fowley of Keeping It Real. We have Jeff York of The Establishing Shot and Pipeline Artists. Annie Banks of The Mary Sue, and We Got This Covered. And Mark the Movie Man Krawcheck, a.k.a. Mark the Movie Folie à Deux. That doesn't really roll off the tongue. And of the Spoiler Room podcast, and also of Sawdust City Fright Fest coming up this weekend. So check that out. Nice plug there, Mark. You got that in your handle. I dig it. Actually, I'll have to remember to link that down in the description below tomorrow.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's a Wisconsin horror movie film festival, so it's very exciting. All right. I don't know exactly where to begin because there's so much discourse around this movie. Most of it I don't really understand. So I think I'm going to have to rely on, especially the folks who didn't care for this entry, to help me out here. What is the problem with Joker Folie à Deux, specifically in regards to how it is different or not different from 2019's Joker? I found this to be, as much as a continuation might have been necessary, which I don't think it necessarily was, I think it did a pretty solid job of going to places that were sort of set up in the first movie. And at the very end scene, which we'll get to in spoilers, sort of settling a question that had been lingering around that film with a definitive answer. Maybe that's sort of the people's problems with it. They didn't like the answer. They like the ambiguity, or maybe there's something else I'm missing entirely. So as we get into it, maybe we'll start with David Fowley. Can you summarize Joker Folie à Deux for us?
I can summarize it in a song. Oh, sorry.
that was more energy than I think any of the musical numbers in this movie. Bad thing, but yeah, they weren't exactly like over the top.
Right. There's a whole lot of that's entertainment in this movie. I actually think this is a pretty good sequel for a movie that doesn't really need it. And I mean, there's definitely worse sequels out there than Folie à Deux. And I guess I kind of appreciated what they did here. I was not a big fan of the first one, and I was glad to see, even though Lady Gaga is not like in a whole lot of the movie, I was glad to see her kind of share the screen. Mm-hmm. And like to have this Arthur Fleck character actually have somebody to kind of play off of was a nice change. And, connect with on kind of an insane level. I mean, it's kind of odd that it's basically the entire movie is pretty much a courtroom, mm-hmm. I guess you could say drama, but it's kind of interesting, kind of a rare move for a I don't know if you even call it a blockbuster. I guess it depends how much money is thrown into it and how much it makes, and we've already seen that. But yeah, it's kind of a different change to see this a sequel to such a popular movie. Just go the courtroom route and then have basically dream musical scenarios. I've seen people complain that it's not really a musical.
Yeah, it is.
Well, it kind of really isn't a musical, and that's cool with me. I mean, it's not a full on musical,
No.
but the musical sequences made sense to me because again, it's all kind of playing up the fantasy element of what's in his head. So I was I'm kind of mid on it, to be honest. I mean, I think it's fine, but it's not as horrible as everybody's making it out to be.
So, okay, that was your reaction, but can you summarize the movie?
Oh, is that what you're wanting me to do?
Yes.
Okay, pass. No, basically, the movie catches up like almost immediately after.
No, 2 years later.
Okay, so that's why I said pass.
Okay.
I saw.
You want me to cover this, Ian?
I saw this so long ago. I can't remember. Oh, it was yesterday.
Yesterday. Okay, David. I'm gonna let you pass over to Jeff.
Go for it, Jeff.
Jeff, go for it.
As opposed to a sequel where we think he gets out of the asylum and becomes the new crown prince of crime in Gotham, that's not where the sequel goes. And maybe that's part of the problem. That's, I think, what maybe fanboys were hoping for or wanting after he basically bloodies up his psychiatrist who is talking to him in the Arkham Asylum room and then runs away at the end. He's caught. He's still in there. And this is a movie about his incarceration, his fantasy life, his loneliness, and his depression and psychosis. And basically what it does is it takes his crimes and they finally get to trial, and it examines why he did it, who he is, what he's going through now. And I think that the smallness of that basic theme allows for the bigness of the basic questions that it asks. It's not plot heavy. It is not action oriented. It is not funny. And it is not a musical. Those are fantasy numbers in his head to escape the harshness of his reality. And they are used as a counterpoint. And if anybody's expecting La La Land, albeit with a better singer like Gaga, that's not what this film is. So in many respects, it's examining who this person is, why he did what he did. What is, I think, the most interesting part about this sequel is it's now about the other people around him that have exploited him. In the first one, it was a lot about his own sort of misunderstanding of who he was in relationship to his colleagues and his mother, and maybe even the state records of the mental institution, et cetera, et cetera. But this one is much about, I think, him being exploited by the prisoners, by the Harley Quinn character, or Lee Quinzel, as she prefers to be called here, because she is a celebrity murderous sort of starfucker. And, the judge lets him represent himself, which is a terrible decision. He lets him wear makeup in the courtroom, which is a terrible decision. And everybody is, I think, projecting on him that they want him to be sort of their retribution or the symbol of their anger from their own lives. And it's not about that. That's what people, I think, maybe thought the first Joker movie was. But I think Phillips is here to correct the record a little bit and suggest that this is a movie about a very sad, mad man and how he has been sort of used and exploited by elements around him, whether it was the institutions in the first movie or those same institutions and even people who pretend to love him or say they love him but don't really. They love the idea of being that close to a celebrity murderer. It's Juan Menendez or something. So anyway, I think that's the basics of the story here. And I also think, if I dare say a quick editorial, I think that's why it's not liked, because I think that it is a dark, sort of bleak film. And if anybody was going to go into this movie going, yeah, he's going to do this and he's going to be that, and yeah, he's going to blow shit up, it's like, Well, no, not this time, not this Joker.
No, I think, and that's why I'm sort of puzzled by it, because I see a lot of kind of thematically a lot of similarities between this and Joker 2019. Although I think one of the things I didn't like about Joker 2019 is, as I've talked about before, is Scorsese was the executive producer on that movie, and he and Todd Phillips have talked about the kind of inspiration, I guess, of Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy. I just found it to be a very derivative, very well acted, but not very interesting version of both, kind of shoehorned into the Batman universe. I mean, you've got him, visiting a young Bruce Wayne at the, in his estate in Gotham, and all these like weird tie-ins to that universe. I'm like, this is not necessary. It's not, interesting. And I think Phoenix did, a fine job, and he won the Oscar for it, for crying out loud. What I thought about Folie à Deux is this movie kind of makes the first film unnecessary. And I feel like if you had just put this movie out, a few years ago, I think people probably would have responded to it just as positively as they did the first movie, because I think it accomplishes the same things, and it has those ties into the DC universe that are a lot more subtle. I mean, I think there's just as much connective tissue there, but it doesn't hit you over the face with it. It allows you to kind of put some pieces together after the credits roll as to like how things may eventually end up with these characters. And people might say, well, the whole trial is flashbacks and relating to things that had happened in the first movie. I mean, I think in the 2 hours and 18 minutes, we go over all that material with witnesses and things like that. I don't think the first movie is particularly necessary. So Mark, what did you make of Joker 2? Being the resident DC shill, I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Well, I gave it 3 out of 5. I didn't hate it. I didn't understand the hate watching it. I was sitting there trying to figure out where the hate comes from, because I enjoyed it, on its own. I like quirky movies, and this is definitely it. The thing is, the first one was telling the perspective from outside the Joker and watching how he became the Joker. In this one, this is all being told from inside the Joker's head. That's why it's a bit disjointed. That's why you have the fantasy moments in here. That's why it feels like a different film, because the majority of the scenes, if you notice, pretty much are all from Arthur's perspective. So this is the world that Arthur is seeing, and this is how chaotic it is, and it can be a little jostling considering how gritty and grimy and kind of grounded the first one was. Because like you said, Ian, for me, I enjoyed the first one. I enjoyed it a little more than this one, but that one was just a retelling of Taxi Driver. This one, they're doing something original. I loved the animated opening that they had to kind of give a summary with the Warner Brothers logo and everything. But
not the DC logo. Notice that.
No, whatever the behind the scenes controversy is. As far as the movie as itself goes, I was entertained. I was fine. I like the musical numbers. I think the original musical numbers, especially the Build the Mountain number, particularly, is my favorite with Gaga and him, where it's kind of a jazzy gospel song. I loved that. That was like one of my favorite songs in there. But no, I think what gets people the most, it's the exact thing that we said when we watched the first one. This is not your Batman Joker. And this movie, even if without the ending, it's not the Joker, because first off, the age difference, right, alone, the Joker is usually not much older than Batman is in most of my experiences where you see him encountered. They're similar in age, and in this one, if you think of the difference in ages, you're like, oh. But what I liked is the fact that it's basically, especially with that final ending that we get, what happens to Arthur, it's basically a statement going, yeah, this isn't the Joker you thought it was. This isn't the Joker going head to head with Batman. This is a guy who took this persona as a Joker because he was a stand-up comic, and someone called him Joker, and it triggered with his psychosis, and that's why he became the figure. And this figure was actually the influence I could see on the real Joker that eventually goes head to head with our Batman. This is where you could see the influence from, and I think that's jarring for people too, because I think people really wanted this to be like the Batman's Joker, and this isn't the Batman's Joker. This is a guy who calls himself the Joker, and he has this look, but this isn't that Joker. This is a guy.
Well, I think. Yeah, and that was kind of what I was alluding to, because I think, if I remember correctly, Phillips, maybe it was someone associated with the first movie, had said that this might, not necessarily be, Arthur Fleck is not necessarily meant to be the rival to Batman. It was he was perhaps he inspired someone, maybe someone who was out in the riots in the street at the end of the movie said, hey, that'd be kind of cool. And we'll get more into the veracity of that in a little bit when we talk about spoilers. But Annie, what did you? It's weird because I'm getting like positive to kind of mixed reactions. I'm not seeing any negative reactions on this stream tonight, which is, it feels like it's mathematically impossible considering the rubbing that this movie is taking. So Annie, help me out here. Tell me you hated the movie. No.
Oh man, I'm also in the mixed crowd because I think that I didn't love it. I'll be so honest. I didn't love it. I think it's a very compelling law drama. I think it's a very strong courtroom take, and I think it's completely isolated. I really like the first Joker. I think isn't the best word to use for it, but I was impressed with how they went about taking such a polarizing character that has a very negative reputation amongst fandom for those who really do identify with the Joker or leech onto the Joker, and it's kind of turned into a kind of cultural icon in the most negative sense. But I think painting a portrait of the effects of mental health and the ongoing male loneliness epidemic was really strong from Phillips and company.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we needed a second Joker, especially if it is just a further descent into madness that really, and actually doesn't go anywhere. It ends, and I think it just dismantles everything that Phillips has done. I think that instead of another inmate at the Arkham Asylum at the end of
What? Hold on, sorry.
Spoilers!
I just want to make sure before you say anything else.
There we go.
Okay, yes.
Okay, yes.
Instead
okay,
of
we're in
another,
spoilers.
instead of a certain cameo at the end of the Batman being teased and kind of convoluting the direction that DC was going in at the time, it should have just been Joaquin Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
It really just should have been, and then you could still pull Lee Quinzel in here, and you can still accomplish a lot of what it was accomplished here. I think that this was just a cash grab that doesn't know its audience, underestimated expectations, and told a completely different story while still borrowing the Joker name. Mm-hmm. It's a shame because I really enjoyed Gaga's performance. I really enjoyed Phoenix's performance. I thought these two as leads were very strong, and I think they worked well together. And it just, even the inclusion of Harvey Dent, I'm like, what are we doing? We're just using whoever is possible.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I loved Harvey Dent in this movie. I loved that he was. Well,
that's interesting. I think you're the first person that's been like, yes, go Harvey Dent in this movie in particular.
Well, and I think because, Phillips in his handling of Dent in here does what Christopher Nolan failed to do in The Dark Knight, which is tease the character, show his origin moment, but then not waste him in, as like a throwaway character. I mean, he deserves his own film. I'm not saying this version does, but I like that we see Harvey Dent as a fully fledged character. He's the White Knight of Gotham. He's an assistant DA in this movie, so he's kind of just starting out. He's got this big, high-profile case, and he's doing everything he can to win that case. And he's doing it, there's nothing shady about him. He's very kind of forthright and everything. At the end, when there's the explosion in the courtroom, in the aftermath, when Arthur is digging himself up out of the rubble of the courtroom, it's in the background, but you can see Dent's body, and you can see that half of his face, the half that was turned towards the explosion, is kind of messed up. You don't get a great look at it, but you can see, okay, there's some seeds there. I love that this movie is very much about planting seeds. I've heard complaints about, well, Lady Gaga isn't really playing Harley Quinn. I believe she is, because there is a reference to, she's not a psychiatrist at Arkham who treats the Joker, but she is kind of a trust fund kid who's fallen in love with this idea of this, criminal madman that she's seen on the news. She checks herself into Arkham Mental Hospital to get close to Arthur. She sees that he's not, he's not the Joker. He's just some guy who's kind of accepted or is trying to accept this mantle that was foisted upon him by the media. He is a media creation at the beginning of this film, even though he's completely zonked out. But she is, they make reference to her being a psychology student, or she has gone to school for psychology. So what I'm imagining, what this movie is, the breadcrumbs it's leading me down the trail is, and we are in spoiler territory, folks, you have been warned, turn back. At the end, when the person who may end up being the real Joker shivs Arthur Fleck mercilessly in that hospital, and then goes to sit down in the background and carve his own face up into what you only imagine as a smile, that guy is going to be interviewed by, I imagine a few years down the road, Dr. Harleen Quinzel, when she takes a role at Arkham Asylum and becomes the shrink that eventually becomes Harley Quinn. Because as we see, she's already ready to commit herself to fangirl out, to go crazy for the Joker. But she realizes that this guy doesn't have it in him. It's not him. And that's one of the things I thought was so brilliant about the movie is, I knew that this guy was not the Joker and could never be the Joker at the end of the first film. He's just some pathetic dude. He's not the clown prince of crime. Right. That's why the movie felt completely wrong to me. I'm like, what are we even doing here? This is cosplay, Joker. And I think Phillips explores that in this movie because we keep getting glimpses of this, from the opening cartoon of the shadow of the Joker, what happens at the end of that movie, or at the end of that cartoon short, the shadow leaves Arthur Fleck and he ends up getting the crap beaten out of him by the adoring public, or the formerly adoring public. And that's how it's a great foreshadowing of what the movie is trying to say about this character is he has a lot of mental problems. He latches onto this persona, but ultimately realizes that he's not that thing, and he can never be that thing. And he's so beaten down and weak that by the end, he doesn't really have a choice because he's been shivved like 19 times in the stomach, but he's laying down dying as the real guy, the real heir to the throne, so to speak, is getting ready to take center stage in the background. Now, a lot of people don't like that because I think a lot of folks did want this to be the Joker played by Joaquin Phoenix. And there might be a feeling that we've watched 2 movies about the Joker without actually having seen the Joker. I love it. Call it a prank, call it whatever. But I think this is what real art house, lofty cinema does. It challenges people. I'm not going to use that phrase, subvert expectations, but it kind of does do that. The idea that, Jeff, this is a musical. I'm sorry. Doesn't matter if the sequences take place in someone's head or not. There are moments where we stop and break out into musical numbers. There's a few of those and some pretty impressive ones. But it is, I've heard there have been walkouts. People are they don't understand that they're watching a musical, which based on some of the TV spots, especially where they're not selling that in the marketing, I can understand. But people falling asleep, walking out, bitching online, I feel like the same way I felt about Megalopolis. This is not a mainstream blockbuster movie, and I honestly don't think mainstream blockbuster audiences are smart enough, ready enough, or deserving enough for what we have here. I've said my piece. And good night, everybody. That's Joker 2.
Folie à deux. Oh,
no,
yes.
One could look at the first movie as a reflection of, I think, an anger that has been building in the country for a long, long time. About isolation, about being left behind, about feeling trampled on. And, I think it's, whatever you want to cast on that, there are plenty of victimized groups in this country, and there always have been. And I think in some respects, this little guy who somehow learned, even if it was through the task of murder, or revenge, whatever you want to call it, to sort of stand up for himself. I think that appealed to some of that anger that maybe people feel, and frustration at the helplessness that they may feel in, the world around them. And, what, as Annie was talking about just before we went on, tech companies and the control of everything in our lives, and they're monitoring us and everything else. And here's this sort of person striking back at that. But I think it was potentially misinterpreted at that point too, because I think people embraced it and turned it into a blockbuster, when to your very point, it is an art house film. It is a revisionist thing. It wasn't a typical DC kind of movie. In fact, it was asking, why do we sort of want these villains to be these ongoing antisocial continuing characters or even heroes and stuff? And I think there was a certain amount of gross misunderstanding of that across maybe the nation or the world. Phillips has said in Empire magazine this month that basically this was not done as a cash grab, but as a counter to that, because he felt a lot of it was misinterpreted. And I think this movie now does something very fascinating to me anyway, is I think it's pointing the finger at us a little bit more. Maybe it was pointing at these people who feel victimized before and showcasing them. But I think this one is about where we stand in enabling this. And I mean, I'll say this as a true crime buff, but I was sitting there asking myself after I walked out of the movie, like, have we all become a little bit too sort of glorifying of criminals, antisocial behavior, everything else? I mean, I wrote in my review, I said, most of our scripted dramas are police procedurals. Podcasts about crime outpace any other podcast by at least 2 to 1. We have turned the Menendez brothers and J.R. Ewing and Tony Soprano and, people like that. Even Loki, on the other side of Marvel, gets his own TV series because we have to make anti-heroes into the new heroes. And I think this movie is asking, what the fuck, man? Why are we doing that? These are bad people. Even if Arthur is unfortunately a victim and he found a terrible way to respond to that by killing people. And yet, we're still entertained. We still think this is cool. People still want to marry the Menendez brothers, and they're going to get another trial because even though they could have walked away as adults, well, they were victimized a little bit, and that's okay, and we're going to make that all right. I don't think that's a good way of thinking, and I think this film is kind of criticizing that. I think it's a strong editorial against a world today that doesn't know the real difference between good and bad, and somehow idolizes all this stuff, and whether it's gangster rap or anti-heroes or Dexter Morgan or people who screw the tax system or whatever else, that somehow, this is asking, where are we in this? Where is our moral compass? And they don't like Arthur when he says, I'm not the Joker. I'm not this bad guy. I made a mistake. I did this. And Harley walks away, and, that sort of takes him off this pedestal.
Well, I think there's something else there too, Jeff. I hadn't really thought about that until you were talking just now. At the end of that first movie, and we see bits of it here, Arthur Fleck Joker is touted as a hero. He's in sight of this mob, and there's all this craziness going on, and there are protesters outside the courtroom saying, hang him, versus like, no, he's our man, and we've got Joker masks on. It's interesting to think that this is the persona, this kind of anti-hero, fascination. But a few years from now, I imagine, in this universe, when the real Joker emerges and goes on a murderous crime spree, I'm not saying that the guy that we see at the end of this is supposed to be Heath Ledger's Joker. We do have that connection. It's sort of a rare thing. I know they did some of it in the comics, but to actually carve the face, carve the smile into the face, usually it was like the Axis Chemicals or Acme Chemicals, whatever, accident, some kind of a circumstance that's made him look like that, so it drove him insane and caused him to become this Joker character, right?
I'm laughing at Mark making a Joker face.
Or
is he advertising Smile too? We don't know.
He's been using Smilex, I can tell that much. But no, my point is I can imagine, I'm not saying I want a third movie, but in my mind, I'm like, there's going to be people in this world when the Joker emerges and starts killing people by the hundreds or the thousands, or is going on this spree that lasts however many years, and Batman's on his trail. There's going to be news reports that are like, yeah, remember this all started when he was being hailed, Arthur Fleck, the first Joker, was being hailed as a hero, and now look where we're at. What happened to us? So I think there is something, if there is a grander societal narrative, it's like, well, yeah, we romanticize these people and these acts because they're so audacious and dark, and they maybe titillate us or expose certain aspects of our personalities we don't want to reckon with. But in doing that, in making that into entertainment, what have we given up?
Well, it's also interesting, and I'd love to hear Annie's take on how they handle Harley in this, because for me, it was an interesting change, because Harley, for me, wasn't just someone who was looking to be connected to the star to get fame. She was there. She manipulates Arthur in a number, which is an interesting dynamic change from what we have seen many times in the past, to where when it's Joker and Harley, usually Joker is mistreating Harley, until later on in the comics they're like, oh, we got to turn this around. It always frustrated me when people said, I wish I was more like this, and they'd show, our relationship was more like this, and they'd show Joker and Harley, and I'd be like, you totally missed the point of that dynamic between those two. You don't want to be like that. But in here, Harley actually takes command in the relationship, and it was just interesting to see them kind of change that dynamic to where, yes, she's enamored with Arthur, but she also soon feels like this is a guy that she can explore, as you put, Ian, she can use to her advantage. But she, being a psychology student, I almost felt like she was using Arthur as her own experiment, in a way, of seeing, what, where this could go and what she could do and what he would allow her to do. Andy, what was your take with Harley on this? Because I enjoyed the portrayal, because it felt different than what we've seen of Harley before.
Yeah, kind of going back to what was said earlier about the entire presentation of Joker and now FOLIE À DEUX. I feel like this was the beginning of DC's Dark, or DC Black, or whatever they wanted to do, that offshoot. And I looked at a fandom Wikipedia page that said that it was originally supposed to stem from Joker. And I more got that inclination from the Batman, and kind of hoped that that would follow in suit, where we did get it following in suit, but just not in the way that people expected. When it comes to DC, and DC compared to Marvel or other properties, has presented itself as this more darker, true crime oriented IP, right? Where all of the, you follow these stories, with even Batman being a cop, right? A detective, and, getting into that more. So you get that true crime influence. And I think that we're not appreciating it here. I do think it was a little misplaced. I do think it could have been a little more comic book honoring than what we got. But, to Jeff's point, that's such a phenomenon right now. It's kind of hard to understand how to target your audience while still matching their demands or their interests. And especially with Harley Quinn, right? Because we've seen multiple iterations of Harley at this point, through animation, video games, and live action. And I wanted to like her because, to me, growing up and following Lady Gaga as this completely unique, very art house oriented artist that was doing something completely different for the time and super campy and challenging stereotypes, I think her energy as a person really does emulate Harley Quinn's mania, and also kind of taps into the depressive episode that we see, happen here and there throughout Harley's overall character arc from different pieces of media. I think this is a nice roundabout way of finding the loophole to include Harley Quinn without outright expressing being like, hey, this is Harley Quinn. Or doing another origin story, as we saw previously, and as we continue to see. I do think that this would have more legs if she was possibly teased at the end of Joker, or this, we see the blonde hair, we see her move about wherever we get a clip of her watching the news, and that ramps up into Lee Quenzel being more prominent. And I think for what it was worth, Gaga gave a really interesting performance. To Mark's point, the reversal of roles and that manipulation, where it's always been the Joker manipulating and abusing Harley Quinn. I think this was a really interesting take, kind of, again, reflecting on how we don't really understand the real possibility of men still suffering from abuse and not having the courage to have that conversation outright in art. And I think that took the courage to have this conversation outright in art. I just don't know if I would like to see that story or that dynamic continue on. The musical element from her, I think, was just perfect. I really was excited to see how she would bring that and level that with her character. I think that definitely did play into the overarching themes of her manipulating him even more, right? Creating this fantasy, as we saw with Zazie Beetz' character in the first movie, creating this extremely parasocial relationship. I do wish that she got a little more time.
Mhm.
I do wish that we got to see her character explored a little bit more instead of just saying she's from upstate and she's a psychology student. Kind of breadcrumbing the audience and going, oh, that's Harley. Lee, that's short for Harley, you know?
Yeah.
While still leaving that door open for possible iterations of Harley Quinn in the future of James Gunn's DC universe, which in this not being a DC film, that's entirely possible. But it continues to conflict with the continuation of these timelines. Again, like I said, with Phoenix possibly being in the Batman, I think that we should have re-invited Margot Robbie or someone, or anyone else to pick up the reins and really carry over to where, you have that familiarity with the character and you're ready to explore that same character in different dynamics and different roles. I think she was underutilized, but was given a very specific role. Like Ian is saying that this movie won't resonate with everyone. It's not going to resonate with anyone. I think we saw more of actual Harley Quinn and the scrapped marketing footage than we actually did.
That's the thing is, like, I am fine. I don't want to see Gaga as Harley Quinn ever again. I don't want to see Joaquin. Well, I could see, if they do like a Flash type thing in James Gunn's universe at some point where we get to see, Joker from, Jack Nicholson and Joaquin Phoenix and God forbid Jared Leto and some kind of a weird alternate universe montage. Forget that. I like that this is a pocket universe. The thing with Harley Quinn is it was a very fine line to walk, because we are still in the shadow of Margot Robbie playing this character, playing a version that's sort of the David Ayer take on the Batman animated series version of this character, or I guess in some of the more modern comics. So in order to do something different with Harley Quinn, I'm glad that she wasn't over the top. When I heard Lady Gaga was cast, I imagined her doing some kind of a big, extravagant, costumed performance. But to see her do this, I thought was really kind of remarkable. And once again, I think the breadcrumbs, that's a great, word you used there, Annie, coming out of this movie. Let's just imagine, once again, if she ends up hooking up with the Joker, as either, patient-doctor relationship, or she just gloms onto him and decides, oh, you really are a maniac and I'm into you. I can just imagine the scenario where she realizes, much as we were talking about here, true crime, true pain, true mental illness is nothing to romanticize or really want to embrace in your life. And if she discovers, hey, this guy really is crazy, and oh my God, now he's abusing me. Oh my God, I can't get away from him because he is a genuine criminal mastermind. That relationship that we all have come to know, and I won't say love, but understand over the years, I can see that playing out in this same universe. We just don't get there yet. And we're not going to get there because this was Arthur Fleck's story, and Arthur Fleck is a footnote in the story of the real Joker of this particular pocket of the DC universe.
I think what a lot
Once
of people...
again, this has been the Joker FOLIE À DEUX show. Thank you, everyone, and good night. No, sorry, go ahead, David.
I think what a lot of people don't understand, probably because they are not familiar with reading comic books in general, is that you could do so many different things with these characters. And for those of us who've been reading comics, we're used to that. Oh, this is a different take on Batman. Oh, this is a different take on Joker. Sometimes they'll slap Elseworlds on there. Sometimes it'll be Vertigo. Sometimes it'll be whatever. Black Label. That's what's kind of refreshing, is that's why these characters have lasted so long. Gosh, I mean, if you look at, Joker from the 40s to the 60s, and then, the 80s, has always evolved, has always changed. Same with Batman. Not so much with Superman, but but you know, you can always have a different angle, and approach and entry to these characters. And if you look at both of these movies together, the last movie and this movie, if you look at it as a whole, it does make the first one a little better.
Yeah.
And it's almost like one kind of maybe a 3-issue prestige format limited series, you know, where it's like, oh well, this is fascinating. What if there was no Joker, but what if the people made up the Joker? You know, it's like, what if this was thrust upon this guy in a way, you know, the popularity and all that and everything. But what if this was more of an examination of male loneliness, anxiety, depression, abuse, you know, addiction, all those things, you know. Yeah, I mean, that's how I see it. I didn't like the first movie for a lot of the same reasons you didn't, Ian, as I felt like it was just really not trying to do his own thing, and it was just really kind of being the taxi driver king of comedy kind of thing, and that was kind of annoying to me considering what could be done in comics.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I still was not on board at all with the whole medical diagnosis of this whole laughing thing. I'm pretty sure it's an actual condition, and that's fine. But I thought that the way Phoenix portrayed it and the way it was written was it wasn't convincing. It was more like, we got to make this guy laugh because it's Joker.
Well, and I think that's David. You brought up a good point. Is that
Finally,
Joker is a movie that Joker is a movie that I vowed after I saw it that I would never watch it again, because I was, you know, frustrated and bored and just wildly unimpressed. But to your point, I feel like there might be. I know this movie was written after the Joker, and Todd Phillips had some other things in mind as far as reacting to the reaction to that movie. But I still feel like there were some seeds perhaps planted in there that are, you know, come to full fruition in Folie à Deux that I might be able to appreciate on some level. There's. Go ahead. Sorry.
I know I didn't mean to cut you off, Ian. Go ahead.
No, you please.
Oh, I was just going to say, I watched because my oldest wanted to go with me to see Joker Folie à Deux, but he hadn't seen the first one. So we watched the first one and he enjoyed it. He did not care for this one, by the way, the second one, sequel at all, just different take. But sitting and watching it again with him, because I hadn't watched it again since I saw it in the theater, I get what they were doing and the statement he was making with the laughing condition. And while it was feeling forced, it actually carries over and plays into this one as to who we're seeing at any point in time in this Joker pocket universe. When he's having the historical laughing, he's not the Joker, he's Arthur Fleck. Right. When he doesn't laugh, he is the Joker. And that carries over into this one, but it's the opposite, where in the first one we saw him laugh a lot because we saw more Arthur than the Joker. Here, most of the movie's being told not just from Arthur's perspective, it's being told from Arthur Joker perspective, because he very rarely gets his condition out to where he's snickering, and if it starts to come, he stops right away. So that's the Joker persona who has taken over, and that's why he's not giggling as much until just before the explosion, when he is pulled back into the prison, and the one guy who's been loyal to him in prison, the young man, he gets beat to crap down to getting killed. Suddenly Arthur, it kicks in, Arthur comes back while he's laying there on the bed. You see it in his eyes. And that's why in the courtroom, he's got his snicker back more in that, because now it's Arthur sitting on the chair confessing, you know what? I'm not really the Joker. I'm just a guy who is a little screwed in the head, and I made some mistakes and got triggered, and he had his laugh back. And I liked the use of that, because I was like, wow, they got rid of that gimmick. Then I realized, oh no, that's because the majority of this movie is still being told from Arthur acting as the Joker, who doesn't laugh, which is hilarious.
Well, right. But and I think this is what I was going to get to in answering David's question, I kind of lost my train of thought, which is why I'm glad you stepped in, Mark. I'm very tired. The whole idea of medicalizing the Joker's laugh was one of the things that kind of turned me off about the first movie. He can't just be a guy who went through something traumatic and it drove him insane, and that's why he laughs. He has to have this medical condition that happens to like 1 out of every 20,000 people, or blah blah blah. So I like the idea that one of the themes that carries over through both films is that Arthur Fleck is not this person. He's not an insane criminal mastermind. He doesn't have that killer instinct that the Joker, the real Joker, the ones that we've seen in all the different incarnations. I mean, Jack Nicholson, I think, was probably the closest that we've seen to a flesh and blood human being who went through a transformation. Heath Ledger was already like that. Jared Leto was already like that. But the whole idea is that there was a psychotic break. And Arthur Fleck has a lot of horrible things happen to him all the way from childhood. So he's just like unstable. I don't mean to, say just. I mean, he's a victim. I feel sorry for him. Even when he's making these horrible decisions, I feel like he's lashing out because he doesn't have the tools to do anything else, really. Even though there are murderous consequences, there's no reason to root for this guy, but there's no reason to outright despise him because he is sort of a victim of his own circumstance and his own, wiring. Whereas the Joker, as we see at the very end of this movie, and as we've seen in other iterations of him in various media, he does not care about anyone. I mean, he would have found a way to Smilex that entire courtroom instead of just giving his own defense, right? So it's Arthur. He's wearing his makeup on, defending himself in the courtroom. It's another costume. It's another layer of him saying, look, everybody wants me to be this guy, and this guy is stronger than the person that I actually am, and he's got power, but I'm not him, but I really want to believe that I am, and maybe if I believe it hard enough, it'll come true. And it doesn't. The whole thing collapses all around him, and he's, what happens to him at the hands of the guards towards the end of the movie, and then when he's thrown into the hole and he hears his friend getting beaten to death outside. Well, first of all, the Joker doesn't have friends. I mean, the real Joker would have been in the hole, like, egging the guards on, saying, I can still hear him breathing out there, guys. You're falling asleep on the job. That kind of a thing. So it's just, it's cool it's a tragedy, but I think this is what I wanted out of that first movie, which is why I think, maybe incorporate elements of that first one into this and just have one really long movie. That's why this one really works for me. But having said that, and I said this at the end of the first Joker when I found out it made $1 billion and they all, they want to make a sequel. I don't want to see any more of these characters in this incarnation. I want to see them in James Gunn's universe. There's all this talk about how Phillips rejected James Gunn's, influence now that he's like the head of DC. I'm glad, because I can guarantee you all they wanted to do was like find a way to incorporate this into whatever they're doing with the new 52 or whatever they're calling it for the new Superman next year. And this movie needs to be in its own separate pocket to be appreciated or discarded on its own and not tangled up in the web of all this other IP nonsense.
It's the same thing with Matt Reeves' Batman and Penguin. I mean, it has to be its own thing. And it's a different alternate take on these characters, which is fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you could take it. That's why, in all honesty, as much as I know everybody loves the fact of how they connected the original Daredevil and that to the current MCU and brought it into the fold of sorts, I liked the idea that those Netflix films were kind of their own Marvel thing and not really connected to the main phase. It's almost in the same way because they had more freedom to kind of do what they wanted with those characters because they were in their own universe. And this was, of course, before really the MCU. So when you got Daredevil and, the spin-offs, Iron Fist and Luke Cage, thank you. And what was the
Jessica Jones? Yeah.
Thank you, Jessica Jones. Thank you. You had that whole universe. I liked that pocket universe that they had there, and I was happy they brought it over. It was them connecting at least some of those characters to the current, cinematic universe that they built. That was a little disappointing for me because I'm like, oh, well, that's going to end up limiting them or changing them. And I liked that freedom and that alternate take or angle that they could take with it. And it's just like the Matt Reeves. I'm digging the Penguin, but the Penguin right now is being written not only as just a superhero drama, but it is literally a gangster drama. I am loving the direction they take with it. And Colin Farrell, I mean, mad props to him. That's not him. That's the Penguin. I keep forgetting that's not an actual actor looking like that. That's makeup, because he is so fun to watch in that role. But I love that universe, and I want that universe to stay there. I don't want Peacekeeper to come into that universe. I don't want other. I like the Matt Reeves universe as its own. And as David said, you could do that. You guys got me back into comics 3 years ago. My pocketbook doesn't it, but I've loved it because I've gotten to read some wonderful storylines and picked up alternate, you pick up alternate titles in that. And there's some wonderful different takes on things. It's interesting to see them take characters. And I think you can do that with the Batman. And I'll shut up. I'm sorry, but I'm just the Batman library of characters, because most of them are human, and it's easier to be malleable, I think, with characters that don't have superpowers than it is with characters that you have superpowers with, because and that's why we've seen Batman, I think, more than any other comic book character, I think, across both franchise, both DC and Marvel, the most different iterations of Batman, because you could do so much with this guy, because he's literally just a guy, right? So you can either give him godlike powers or not. Just like Joker, you could make him this Arthur Fleck guy, or you could make him a criminal mastermind that's pulling the strings of 18 different organized crime families.
Right, and I think I do like that the possibilities of variation, but I also, again, being a big comics reader, that's why I didn't respond to Joker 2019, because I'm like, this movie isn't really about the Joker. It's something else. And I feel like I didn't feel like I needed a sequel, but having watched this wrap up, I feel like I do, because whatever Todd Phillips thinks about comic books or comic fandom, even if it's completely accidental, I think he found a way to weave the comic book ness back into this movie, even if it's literally only in the last 45 seconds. So yeah, I really appreciate this movie in ways that I hadn't expected to. And for the people who are really disappointed in this, or they're refusing to see it because they hear it's terrible, I guess my question is, what do you want? I mean, do you want Joaquin Phoenix to literally become the Joker and start pulling heists and run into Batman? We've seen that story over and over and over again. We're presented with something brand new, and people are like, this is too new. It's too different. And that's why when Matt Reeves relaunches, the DC universe with Superman and all those others, I'm not interested in anything he's doing. James Gunn. Sorry, did I say Matt Reeves?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry,
I
was thinking about
that was wish fulfillment.
You're kind of projecting that we get a Matt Reeves Superman movie.
Well, no, I don't want to see any of it. I didn't like the Batman either, and I haven't watched the Penguin because I don't have HBO Max, but I've enjoyed watching the trailers for the Penguin that I've seen because I like Colin Farrell. But one of the problems I had with the Batman is that was too grounded. I'm watching Colin Farrell. I'm like, what the hell does that have to do with the Penguin at all? It's just a guy with a scarred face and he's kind of fat. So hey, we made an entire series about this. I'm like, awesome. I'm not going to watch it. But all of these, new iterations that we're going to get, it's just going to be more of the recycled IP. I feel like I've kind of lived through the golden age of that. They're going to be making these movies long after all of us are dead. I'm kind of okay with
golden age of IP. Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh no, you're making a golden shower joke, David, and I love you for it. But that's also what I want to do to the DC main universe. But
I'd expect nothing less from a live stream.
Oh my goodness!
Oh jeez!
Wow. But no, I'll stop rambling there. It's just that I feel like this is a good a time as any to kind of step off. I know we've gotten some great casting announcements about the Green Lantern series and all this other stuff. I'm like, it's a Green Lantern television show. Am I going to watch this? Just am I going to have to watch all of the Star Trek series that have come out in the last 50 years in order to get what's going on? no, it's okay to skip out on some of this stuff. And, maybe I'll come back when I'm 75 and be like, oh, there's the 68th Superman. Maybe this will be good. But for right now, I'm just kind of done, which is why Joker Folie à Deux, I think, is a great jumping off point for me, because I'm like, well, there is still some creativity. There's still some life left in these franchises. Unfortunately, based on the reaction, the poor box office, and the overwhelmingly negative response from critics and so-called fans, I don't know that we're going to get any more of these daring experiments, which is all the more reason for me to say, well, it's going to be more of the same, because I have to protect their investments. So what's in it for me? The answer is probably nothing.
Well, especially if the studios are going the direction that we have seen in a couple articles that state that they may start assembling super fan focus groups on how they should handle certain IPs. And I'm like, well, that's gonna go.
Well, I mean, we talked about this a bit, I think, on your pre-show the other night, Mark, is like, if they had a focus group for this movie, and people said, oh, we don't want to see we don't want to see Joker 2, just do something else with another DC character. Well, the executives at Warner Brothers said, okay, the public, as represented by our super fan group, does not want to see a sequel to Joker, our $1 billion+ grossing film.
Yeah,
we respect that, and we're going to move on. Or would they say, hey, we need another focus group of 10 different nerds to get in here who want to see a sequel to? My goodness. All right, I want to pull over here because we're just about at time.
And that focus group rumor has cracked me up.
Well, who knows if it's a rumor? Well, I guess it's a rumor if it is a rumor.
It's
all right. So we're gonna get to some comments. They're all from David Wilt. All right, David, if you're still watching, we're gonna go through your comments. What makes the Joker such a very famous villain is that he is someone who is very humorous and very sinister. This is true, which is, I think, one of the reasons that Arthur Fleck very clearly is not the Joker. I don't know if you guys ever seen it, but there's an old classic silent movie called The Man Who Laughs with Conrad Veidt. His character is a young boy who is disfigured by a tyrant king, making it seem like he is permanently smiling. Was the inspiration to the Joker. I have not seen The Man Who Laughs, but I have seen the famous stills of him and some of the earlier. I think it was David. Was it the original Gotham by Gaslight? I think they had like a image of the Joker, like on a wanted poster or something. It was very much the Conrad Veidt Man Who Laughs image, if I'm remembering it correctly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Conrad Veidt also played Caesar the Somnambulist in The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. That's probably his most famous role.
Yeah, well, even the way he was drawn back in the was it the 30s, 40s? Originally, Joker very much resembled that portrayal from that movie.
Nice. Speaking of movies, they don't feel like a musical. If you think of the Blues Brothers from 1980s, that movie is definitely a musical. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
If you think back to the movie The Dark Knight, which was Heath Ledger, the Joker's backstory in that movie is about the child abuse. He was disfigured by his father. Now, it's interesting you bring that up because that was one of the stories that he told, but he told, I think, 3 different.
He tells 3.
How I got the stars, scars, or stars, stories. So it's a mystery. But yeah, I love the ambiguity. I don't know if you guys ever watched it, but there was a superhero series.
Joan Severance.
Oh, that's a deep cut.
African American version of the Joker called The Gangster Prankster. No, I don't think I ever watched Black Scorpion.
Oh God, Black Scorpion. Yeah.
Hey, Mark, I think this is an invitation for you to do a special on the Shazam ISIS hour from the late 70s for the kiddies.
Yes.
The Shazam ISIS hour?
Yes, they had 2 superheroes, one for the boys, one for the girls. One was about Shazam, which we know from the movie. The other was a teacher who discovered an amulet in the desert as she was investigating some ruins and buried treasures and all that kind of stuff. And she turned into sort of this version of sort of like a Cleopatra sort of sorceress who also fought the bad guys with these powers.
Named Isis.
Wow.
Named ISIS. Named after ISIS.
And not the global terror group. No.
I mean, you have to change the name if you.
Yeah. That's why you have the Scarlet Scarab now, or whatever. I think her name is. No, just kidding.
Wow. I don't know if you guys ever watched it, but in the early 90s, there was a spin-off to America's Funniest Home Videos called America's Funniest People. And the late Arlene Sorkin, who played Harley Quinn on Batman, was the co-host of the show.
Yep.
Man, David, do you just know everything about old
She
TV
started
shows
on
and
Days
pop
of Our
culture?
Lives
Crazy.
as well.
Yeah, she did.
That's
In
right.
fact, yeah, that's where the true inspiration first came from.
Wasn't she Calliope in Days of Our Lives? With,
Yes, that's correct.
With, what's the
Comic
dude,
Relief with Nicholas Coster.
John Delancey.
Yeah, John Delancey, right.
Yeah.
How the hell do you people know all this information? Are you guys collectively David Wilt? Is like
No.
Yeah.
My wife watched Days of Our Lives.
My mom did.
Yeah.
We
and my
report
mom.
on it, and I know about it vicariously, but
Do you report on Days of Our
Sadly,
Lives?
I like absorb information from what people are looking into about.
Sadly, I'm old enough to remember those shows when they were on the first time because they were popular shows back in my
They're
youth.
still really popular.
They are.
Still a very
Days of Our Lives is the only NBC soap left.
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
There's two on CBS, Young and the Restless, Bold and the Beautiful, one on ABC, General Hospital, and one on NBC with Days.
Because I thought it was only one network.
I remember it was Days of Our Lives, Another World, and Santa Barbara, and that's where I learned about Robin Wright because she started out on Santa Barbara. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
My wife watches General Hospital, and I recognize one actor who used to be on the show 24. That's my contribution to the whole discussion. Sorry. Did you know that before playing the role of the Joker on Batman, Mark Hamill once played a Joker-like villain?
Yeah, he was the trickster. He was the trickster. I loved the 90s Flash. That was their first kind of attempt at doing, comic books, still feeling it out. And the 90s Flash was great. He was a
pretty beefy Flash.
I know.
Well, he was beefy. That
guy was like, like a brick shithouse.
He was beefy.
Or a brick ship house, because that was John Wesley Shipp.
That's right. I was just gonna say John Wesley Shipp. Nice pun there. Love ya. That's
Thank
a good
you.
one.
Also, but I knew him. I kind of watched The Flash when it was on, but not really. But I mostly knew John Wesley Shipp as Dawson's dad on Dawson's Creek. Died in a car accident while reaching over to get an ice cream cone that had fallen out of his hand. Anyway, yeah, he didn't want to wait for the stop sign. Okay,
no.
Gang.
Wow.
Yeah,
I don't want to wait
That's
for my
Dawson's
ice
Creek.
cream. It's melting.
that's right. That's a
My
show they need
God.
to bring back. James Gunn's Dawson's Creek. Anyway,
There you go.
gang, this conversation went places I could not have expected, and also had a different tenor than I expected. I thought at some point someone would be yelling at me because I think we are the only podcast / live stream on the entirety of the internet that has had positive things to say about Joker: FOLIE À DEUX.
It's not bad. I think it's not a bad movie. I think it's just emotionally charged responses from DC fans that expected more.
Yep.
Yes.
Exactly.
Very fair enough.
It's a good sequel.
I need to see this movie again. I don't know. I'm not sure if IMAX was the best play here, because aside from a couple of scenes, it didn't strike me as particularly IMAX worthy. Oh, I do want to mention one thing because I forgot. Help me out here. The judge in this movie, Judge Herman Rothwax,
Bill Smitrovich,
the great Bill Smitrovich. Was he purposely done up to look like Martin Scorsese? Because I could not stop thinking about
I thought he looked like Abe Beam.
I thought he looked like Harry Carey.
Order on the court, everybody.
Speaking of the court, you know what I thought was funny is when they said we're back in session for the people or the city of New York City, the New York City versus Arthur Fleck, and I'm like, what? And then it mentioned Gotham. But in the movie, they actually say
it was the state. It was the state of New York.
State of New York.
Oh, okay.
It was the state of New York.
Right. Okay.
So Gotham.
So Gotham is in New York. All right.
Yes, officially. Also, one thing before we go, I do want to mention Lee Gill playing Gary Puddles. The little person who was up on the stand. That was a surprisingly emotional and fascinating, interplay between these characters. Also, when Zazie Beetz' character shows up, I mean, as a courtroom drama, it's not all played for laughs. Like, oh, the Joker's defending himself. There's some really meaty stuff here, and I feel like people who, if they walked out just during the early musical portions of it, they really missed out on some pretty interesting comic book drama, or a drama for a comic book movie, if you want to put it that way.
That was nice too, because when both of those characters were on the stand, I don't think Arthur Fleck really knew what to do, which was cool.
Yeah, you saw him like trying out the different voices and stuff like that. And that was when I felt like he was confused, because he was perhaps thinking that Joker persona would kind of come out and guide him to do what he was going to do, to be the showman. But he was kind of struggling, like the same way he struggled when he was a stand-up comedian. He just wasn't funny. He wasn't a natural, talented performer. And that's when, you know, he was calling upon the Joker, and the Joker just wasn't there. And that was really interesting. Yeah, I want to see this movie again. And folks out there, if you are on the fence about going to see Joker Folie à Deux, I say get off the fence, go see it, or rent it, you know, when it comes out on digital in about 2.5 weeks, or maybe 3 hours, who knows.
3 hours.
But I think it is worth watching. If you hate musicals, I understand, because I didn't like musicals until somewhat very recently. If you're expecting this to be another standard comic book movie, it's not that. I think it's something much better, something very different. And if the last hour plus has not convinced you, well, sorry, we did our best. Anyway, thanks all of you for hanging out. Thanks, David Wilt, for commenting. Oh, wait, hold on a second. We have another comment. Let's see. Rehulda. Nice. Thank you. Thanks for the discussion. I like Joker 2 as well. Well, thank you very much for chiming in. We did too. But yeah, so thanks for joining us this Wednesday night. Next Wednesday night, we're going to be talking about Saturday Night, the movie about Saturday Night Live.
Not The Apprentice?
No, I'm going to be writing about that coming out hopefully on Friday. But yeah, so we're going to talk about Saturday Night, and I think in a couple weeks, Jeff, you inspired this series. Here we go again. We're going to be talking about A Nightmare on Elm Street, which turns 40 this year. Talking about that and the 2010 Nightmare on Elm Street remake.
Whoa.
Yeah. So I probably will be talking to myself in that episode, because I don't want to put anybody through that. Anyway. But thank you all for hanging out. I am Ian Simmons of Kicking the Seat. We have David Fowley of Keeping It Real, Jeff York of The Establishing Shot and Pipeline Artists, Annie Banks of The Mary Sue and We Got This Covered, Mark the Movie Man Krawcheck of Special Mark Productions and the Spoiler Room Podcast. We are Earth's Mightiest Critics. You can follow all of our stuff. The information is down below, along with the other Earth's Mightiest Critics who could not be with us tonight for various reasons. But we had a very, very big and robust panel, so this has been great. But if you liked this live stream, please like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. Be sure to support the EMC, as we call ourselves. And until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thanks very much. Take care. And if you got to go with a smile.
A smile.
Yeah.
Smile.
That's it.